This is the Connect Podcast, where business meets leadership. We talk with influential newsmakers, business leaders, and decision makers important to New York's economy. Welcome into another edition of the Connect Podcast. I'm your host, Pat Bailey, filling in for Heather Mulligan. Today we're joined by our friends from the Workers' Compensation Board, Anthony Tomaselli, an advocate for business, and Steve Scotti, the executive director. Both of you welcome. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having us, Pat. We really appreciate it. As you know, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, there's a couple proposals we want to talk to you about today. The first one, two proposals by the governor that would be in as part of the budget process, and we'll get to that in a second. But the first one is a law change that will allow all eligible healthcare providers to treat injured workers within the workers' compensation system. Anthony, why don't we start with that topic there, and that's we'll start with the overview on that. Why don't you explain a little bit about how the current process is set up, and why the health providers.
So we're really excited about universal authorization. We've been hearing a lot of feedback. I know I go out and I speak to business groups all the time, and we hear a lot of feedback from employers and workers on the difficulty finding a provider to treat workers' compensation cases. So under the current process, a medical provider has to go through an application process to be able to treat and bill. It's really about the billing for workers' compensation patients. We're going to get rid of that. We want to take that away and make it so that any provider in New York State could treat a workers' compensation case. As it is right now, we believe there are over 200,000 eligible medical providers who could treat patients, and about 10% of them go through the process of completing that application and becoming eligible to treat patients. And, so that's going to vastly increase the availability of providers. So we think that's a win for everyone in the system.
You said about 200,000. Is there a goal in mind? Is it as many that can sign up? What are you envisioning the expansion to look like?
Well, we would like to hear from patients that they're not having an issue accessing providers. We hear stories, particularly in the suburban and rural areas, about patients having to drive 30, 40, an hour, 60 minutes to go see a doctor just to get treated for a medical condition related to a workplace accident or injury. And that's exactly the kind of story we don't want to hear.
Is there a reason why there's so few practitioners today? Is there maybe some red tape to sign up? Is it and not aware of the what's out there? What is it?
That's a good question, Pat. I think we've been kind of beating around that ourselves here at the Workers' Compensation Board for a while, right, Steve? I think there's a lot of misleading assumptions about what the process is like. And I think, medical providers are not starving for patients, right? Would it be fair to say that as well?
So we've streamlined the process a lot in the last 5 years. I think a lot of the criticism that you may hear is kind of outdated from years ago. For example, we used to have so many different forms that a provider would have to use for a specific task. In 2022, we eliminated 12 forms, and now all the provider has to use is a medical narrative form. So we've simplified the process a lot. We went from a paper process for prior authorization requests to an online process where the provider sees in real time the status of the request in an online dashboard. So we've made a lot of improvements over the last several years, but we know we need to get more providers into the system. And at the authorization process, which stems from the 1930s when it was put into the statute, that in and of itself is an obstacle to providers to get authorized. And we hear this from patients. We get about 600 inquiries a month asking for assistance to find a doctor who would be willing to take workers' compensation. So the obstacle of the authorization, we want to eliminate that as we've eliminated other obstacles. We'd like to move that 10% needle. We think about 10% of all providers that are licensed in the state of New York are treating workers' comp patients. We'd like to move that needle forward. We realize that it'll still be voluntary up to the doctor to participate, but we want to enable them to do it in real time. Currently, under the process by statute, when an application comes to us, we have to refer to the medical society and wait wait 45 days for them to comment on it. So the process is really outdated. It no longer serves the purpose that it served back in the 1930s, when you didn't even have the regulatory entities now that are ensuring that medical providers are meeting standards of care. So this is one obstacle we've heard from. Oh, and by the way, the county medical societies generally charge a fee for authorization as well. So we want to, remove that fee, make this as easy as possible so that we can get more providers into the system. Yes, we need more specialty providers and more primary care providers in rural areas, but we also need more primary care physicians in urban and suburban areas. Quite frankly, we hear lots of complaints from injured workers. My treating doctor, who I've had a relationship with for 20 years, doesn't take comp. So now I have to go to a stranger who doesn't know me, who I don't have a trusting relationship with me. So we really think this is a very big, important change that could be enacted through the governor's proposal here. It will really change the landscape dramatically and open up access for medical care to injured workers. I should say, in the state of New York, employers don't have the right to direct care absent a PPO or preferred provider organization. So injured workers have the freedom to go to any board authorized medical provider. The problem is only 10% of them are authorized. So we want to remove that obstacle so that they can get treatment same day, much more expedited from their regular care providers. It's a proposal that we look at, Patrick, as a win-win-win, really. Employers and employees want expedited access to quality medical care. Everybody, employers want their injured workers to get the treatment they need as quickly as possible so they can recover to the fullest extent possible and return to work. And of course, injured workers, they deserve quality medical care. This initiative will help them get that.
So it's interesting. You said a lot there, and the one thing that struck me was the fact that some of the laws were written in the 1930s. We've worked with the governor's office, the Business Council, on a myriad of issues now, trying to update and modernize laws that were written hundreds of years ago that are still on the books. Some of them that come to mind, the State Liquor Authority laws, LCA law, or the SLA laws. And some other ones, working with her office to try to modernize these laws that really would help businesses in general. And in this case, you laid out a great point for trying to modernize these laws. I guess the one question I have, though, is you mentioned it's a complicated system. How will the new practitioners, I guess, be educated, and how long do you expect them to be up to speed and ready to be able to treat?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the board does quite a lot of education outreach to all of our stakeholders. We're obviously going to continue to do that with the medical providers. And frankly, we're going to show them what to do. We do robust training education. We do webinars, we do in-person trainings, and we will have to do that for the medical providers as well. So whatever it takes, we'll go wherever we need to go, speak to whoever we need to speak to.
And to kind of wrap this up before we move on to the grant proposal, you touched on it a little bit. I don't know if you have numbers available, but you mentioned fixing the backlog, and that's really what I want to hammer home here. And I don't know if you have numbers, how many are waiting, but I guess just again, give me an example, or not an example, but just summarize how this is really going to fix the backlog, and just how big of a backlog we're talking about.
The backlog on hearings, or the backlog?
Or the backlog on people waiting to see providers and not being able to get in and to see, to be seen.
Well, if there's not enough doctors around for people to see, there's a wait to get into one of those eligible providers. And then in many cases, some workers don't even have the ability to cover the transportation to make it to the doctor that they want to see. So then they have to wait on arranging transportation to make that travel. So there's, a number of factors that could make the whole process take longer if you just can't get to the doctor. So that's what we're trying to address, is that first hurdle right there. Get the patient seen. You got an injury, you got an illness, get it taken care of, get to the provider, get it treated.
Streamlining the process, something that, government, a lot of people want government to do. So the second proposal we talked about, briefly, and then we'll get more into a grant for a program for district attorneys to fight workers' comp fraud. And I'm not sure many taxpayers would argue with that, right? We're talking about, in the grand scheme of things, of a large budget, we're talking about what some I think would assume would be, or not assume, but label a small piece of the pie to fight that, $17 million. Let's talk broadly about that first, what the grant would do and what it would give the district attorneys the ability to do.
Sure, thank you. So first, I'd like to just start out with how large the workers' compensation system is in the state of New York. When you look at the amount of premium or premium equivalent, it's over $8 billion in the New York State workers' compensation system, and it's a large system. And as with any large system, there's a certain level of fraud that exists. The workers' compensation fraud is a felony offense, but we see very few prosecutions and very few convictions in the state of New York. When we look at another state like the state of California, a couple of years ago, they have over 100 convictions a year, over 1,000 prosecutions a year. That doesn't happen in the state of New York. So what this proposal does is it creates a grant funding for district attorney offices to establish a dedicated workers' compensation fraud unit within their offices so that they'll have the resources that they need to prosecute workers' compensation fraud of all types. And workers' compensation fraud exists across the spectrum. You'll have, employee fraud, the accident never happened, or perhaps the disability alleged is magnified by the accident. You can have employer fraud, the accident is not reported, or perhaps the employer is misclassifying the individual or not reporting the proper payroll. Medical providers can create false reports. Doctors, lawyers, all the stakeholders who participate in the workers' compensation system, if they engage in fraudulent activity to either get benefits for someone who's not entitled to them or to deny benefits for someone who is entitled to them, may be guilty of the crime of workers' compensation fraud. So what this proposal does is it takes $17 million and it allows it to be accessed by county district attorneys through a grant application process where they would use the funds for a dedicated workers' compensation fraud unit. Now, I would be remiss, Patrick, if I didn't mention the Workers' Compensation Fraud Inspector General, which exists in the state of New York pursuant to the statute. They will continue their role of investigating all types of workers' compensation fraud. They'll continue their role in going to county district attorney offices. They already have well-established relationships with many where they seek to get claims prosecuted by the district attorneys. And the Workers' Compensation Board will continue to collaborate with the Workers' Comp Fraud Inspector General. So what this does is it basically ensures that there are funding for workers' compensation fraud, because we all agree that we need to create a meaningful deterrent. So people who commit fraud will be held accountable and pay the price, and people will be deterred from committing fraud. And that's what this proposal does.
Seems like a pretty straightforward, common sense type of proposal. Are there any kind of figures you have, and broad figures, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions, whatever it may be, in terms of what fraud looks like right now?
It's difficult to get figures for like one state. There are a lot of figures that are thrown out there. One of the things that will happen is if this program passes, we'll actually start accumulating data so that we can see exactly how much prosecution has taken place and how many convictions have taken place and the types of fraud. So it's difficult to put a number on any particular type of fraud, but there are some associations out there that try to do it to the best of their ability.
And you talked about everybody's kind of got a hand in here: employee, employer, provider, insurance, all potentially having the ability to provide fraud. So is there one sector of those four that you're really honing in on, or is it kind of across the board? Is it more employer driven, provider driven?
No, I think it's important. We're not looking to target any particular type of fraud. Criminal conduct needs to be held accountable and prosecuted, and that would really be within the district attorney offices. We at the Workers' Compensation Board, we want to see all types prosecuted. So as we look at the application for grants and or renewals, we're going to want to ensure that all types are prosecuted. So it's not just one type of fraud.
So a lot of, for those that don't know, employers system, the workers' comp system is funded by employers. So the grant program funded by assessments on employers. Is there any kind of figure as to what an employer could see moving forward in terms of a cost increase?
Yeah, that's a great question, Patrick, because for the last 5 years, we've reduced the annual assessment against employers because by statute, we are required to assess all employers in the state of New York to fund our operational expenditures as well as the liabilities that are associated with various funds that are in wind down status. So, for example, last year, the total assessment against New York employers was $570 million. We believe that number is going to go down again. So even though the $17 million would be in addition, we think it'll be offset by the continued reduction. But when we look to see how much money this would probably be on average for each employer, we're looking at like $10. When we do outreach to employers, they're willing to have the assessment applied so that fraud is prosecuted, fraud is identified, and all types of fraud. Even, employers have to compete against other employers. So they're at a disadvantage when one employer is underestimating their payroll or engaging in fraudulent activity that lowers their costs. So every dollar that can be saved on a premium, or if you're a self-insured employer, and in New York State itself and the city of New York and most municipalities are self-insured. Every dollar that's saved can be applied to other benefits for employees. So we really think this really benefits, again, just like universal authorization, this benefits everybody except the criminals.
That's the people we don't want to benefit, obviously. At the end of 2025, it was in the fall. It was a kid, and I call him a kid because I think he's 23 years old. I'm much older. So, a kid with a camera exposed all this fraud in Minnesota. It really started the conversation nationwide, looking at programs, government-run programs, all programs where public money is being used. I guess what I'm trying to get to the point is, how important is this type of fraud, to people that maybe don't realize. Again, you've touched on it throughout this conversation, but how prevalent it is and how important it is to root it out.
Well, we hear about it all the time, Pat. I do a lot of outreach. I spend a lot of time visiting face-to-face with employers throughout the state, and they ask those questions all the time. What are you going to do about our competitors who are cheating? A lot of times they'll use that word instead of fraud. Our competitors who are cheating, and we're listening. We're trying to do something about it, and this is how we're going to try to do it. The governor's behind it. We're behind it. Hopefully we can make a difference.
And that's a perfect segue. So we talk about this as a budget issue, right? So really we have no idea when a budget's going to be agreed upon, but we probably safe to assume we have at least a couple of weeks here from this taping to get the message out. Obviously you're on this podcast. What is the Workers' Compensation Board doing? I'm sure you have, people talking to the legislature directly, but, to get the word out to the public, to get some support behind this. Again, just to make them aware of that this is going on and that a change needs to be made.
Well, Pat, you've had me on your podcast before, so or maybe you don't know what I do for the board, and that is outreach. Yeah. Last year, I visited 98 different chambers of commerce and professional organizations around the state to speak to them in person. And share this information about what the board is doing to help them, and also take feedback from them to help inform these decisions. And our advocate for injured workers does the same thing, although his job is a little bit different because he gets a lot more phone calls coming into him, whereas I have a little harder time getting the employer's attention. So we do this. We have our webinars. We're committed to communicating with the public as best we can at the board. I don't know, Steve, if you want to add anything to that.
We have both of the governor's proposals on our website. with a lot of those who are willing to publicly support it are listed on our website. Last week there was a press release that was issued for universal authorization. We continue to do outreach. In addition to the advocates who do outreach day in and day out, we've been doing outreach to large stakeholders, asking them to support both initiatives, answering any questions that they may have with respect to both initiatives. I've done outreach to lots of employers about the fraud proposal and the universal authorization proposal, and I must say that the feedback has been very positive for both initiatives. The fraud initiative, even though there's a small price to pay that they probably won't see because there'll be a net offset, a lot of positive feedback there. And on access to medical care, I mean, this is a big game changer for the system in the state of New York, and a lot of support for that. So we're hoping that both of these initiatives will be enacted in the budget.
Well, something the Business Council supports as well. Hopefully in maybe 6 months. We'll wait for a year. Maybe we'll have you back on in a year and we can talk about the numbers of fraud that was stopped, right? Instead of talking about all the fraud that goes on, we can talk about what you actually found and stopped.
Sure.
All right. Well, we appreciate it. Workers' Comp Board, again, something that the Business Council works closely with on a myriad of issues, including these two. Wish you the best of luck with your advocacy moving forward. Anthony Tomaselli, the advocate for business, and Steve Scotti, the executive director. Thank you both so much for coming on.
Thank you, Pat.
This has been a presentation of the Connect podcast, produced by the Business Council, the voice of employers in New York State.